I never thought I would meet someone like Jake. We met by chance at a corner cafe, and from the very first moment, there was a spark between us. It was early in the morning, and I just went there to get a cup of coffee. Jake was sitting at the next table, and as it turned out, he was the one who accidentally caught my eye. He offered to share a table, since the cafe was crowded. Starting with a simple conversation about the weather and coffee, we suddenly realized that we had a lot in common, from our favorite books to our passion for traveling. A year later, filled with laughter and joy, we decided to get married. Our wedding was modest, but so happy. It took place in a small country house surrounded by blooming gardens. Only the closest friends and relatives were invited to the ceremony. We exchanged vows under an arch decorated with white roses and green branches. At that moment, I felt like the world had stopped and it was just the two of us. Our friends were having fun, dancing and enjoying our love. Even the weather that day was perfect, as if nature itself was blessing our union. I can't forget that moment when Jake, tenderly holding my hand, whispered in my ear, "I promise that I will try to make you happier every day." His words warmed my soul and filled my heart with love. I thought that we would have a long and happy life together. We made many plans for the future. We were going to buy a house on the coast, get a dog, and maybe even 3 children. Our dreams were simple, but they seemed the most important in the world to us. I was always impressed by how Jake was able to find joy in the simplest things. He could make me laugh even when I was having a bad day. His optimism was infectious, and he taught me to see the bright side of life, no matter the circumstances. Together, we explored new places, discovered new hobbies, and created countless memories that will forever remain in our hearts. Every morning, I woke up feeling grateful for having Jake. Our days were filled with little rituals that made them special. Having breakfast together, walking in the park in the evening, watching old movies, cuddling under a blanket. We enjoyed every moment spent together and never imagined that something could ever ruin our happiness. But, unfortunately, life is not always predictable, and we were destined to face trials that would test the strength of our love, but that is another chapter of our story. It was only a few months later that tragedy struck. Jake died in a car accident, and the world around me collapsed, shattering into a million pieces. In an instant, all our plans and dreams for the future disappeared, leaving me in an abyss of sadness and despondency. His warm laughter, encouraging hugs, and sincere conversations. All of it was gone forever. My life collapsed in an instant, and I felt like I had lost the meaning of existence. Everything seemed empty and meaningless. Each day was like an endless labyrinth of pain, where it was impossible to find a way out. I woke up every morning with a heavy heart, feeling like morning after morning was like a nightmare. But the worst thing was that his family treated me like a stranger. They never really accepted me, and now this feeling was even more acute. After all, they were deeply religious, and I almost did not believe in God. Their faith gave them comfort and hope that Jake had passed on to a better world, that they would one day see him again. For them, this tragic circumstance had some higher meaning. I could neither understand nor feel this comfort. My struggle with my own emotions seemed useless and exhausting. They saw me as someone who, in their eyes, could not truly understand their loss. In their eyes, I was a stranger who had suddenly entered their family circle, and they did not share my grief as I would have liked. I remember standing at his funeral, surrounded by silent faces, feeling like the loneliest person in the world. The tears flowed uncontrollably, but none of his relatives approached me with words of comfort or support. They prayed, raising their eyes to heaven, and I could only hang my head in despair. The loneliness I felt was unbearable. There was no way to return to the times when everything was good, when Jake was there, giving me his love and tenderness. Every day without him was torture, plunging me deeper into the abyss of grief and misunderstanding. So months passed, filled with hopelessness and pain, and ahead of me lay a long road to healing, a road that I had to walk alone. At first, it was just looks of condemnation and whispers behind my back. Then, open attacks began. They blamed me for what had happened, saying that I had brought misfortune into their home. I tried to stay away, but they would not leave me alone. Every day, I felt more and more isolated and alone. Their words penetrated deep inside, making me doubt every thought and action. No one came to my aid, not even those I considered friends. They silently watched, or worse, joined in the insults. It became part of their daily entertainment, to make fun of me, to find a reason for contempt in every action of mine. It seemed that the whole world had united against me. I was persecuted even in my dreams. Nightmares were filled with the same faces as during the day, but there they were even harsher, even more persistent. I was afraid to go outside, afraid of meeting people familiar and unfamiliar. Sometimes it felt like the walls of the house were closing in, trying to crush me with their silent condemnation. Every time I tried to justify myself or defend myself, it only got worse. They laughed at my attempts to explain myself, considering them pathetic and useless. They found new ways to humiliate me, to make my life unbearable. Sometimes I wondered if they were right. Maybe I really was to blame for all the problems. These thoughts haunted me, destroying me from the inside. But the worst part was the feeling of helplessness. There was no way out, no hope for improvement. Each new day brought only new humiliations and insults. I lost faith in people and justice. All I could do was try to simply exist, without attracting attention to myself, and hoping that one day all this would end. However, deep down inside, there was a small spark of hope. It flickers, almost imperceptibly, but enough to keep me from breaking completely. I knew that somewhere there were people who could understand and support me. Maybe one day I would find the strength to leave this nightmare and start over, far from those who had caused me so much pain. These thoughts became my consolation. I started writing in a diary, pouring out all my feelings and experiences. It became a kind of therapy, helping me cope with the pressure and not go crazy. At times, I imagined a future where there is no place for hatred and contempt, where people can forgive and understand. These fantasies became my salvation in the most difficult moments. With each passing day, I learned to be strong, learned to survive and not give up. Hope for a better future and faith in myself became my main allies. I knew that one day this darkness would dissipate and I would be able to breathe deeply again, free from the shackles of the past. One night, Jake's older brother Tom came home very drunk. His movements were unsteady and his words were tangled like threads in a pattern. The house was filled with half-shadows and every sound seemed exaggeratedly loud. I tried to move away from him, but the cramped space of the kitchen did not allow me to go far enough. Tom began to blame me for all their troubles, shouting and waving his arms. There was anger in his eyes that I had never seen before. Suddenly, he came right up to me and pushed me. I hit my back on the kitchen table and cried out in pain. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body froze, paralyzed by fear. Tom's threats turned into harsh and humiliating words that hit my soul, leaving wounds deeper than physical beatings. He grabbed my hand and squeezed it so hard that I cried out in pain, but no one came to help. The world shrank to the size of a small, dark room with no exit. I was too scared and confused to resist. At that moment, silence was my only salvation. I just stood there, motionless as a stone, hoping that his anger would subside and he would let me go, but it was far from over. Tom continued to take out his anger on me. Each blow and each insulting phrase felt like an eternity. It was a terrible, humiliating ordeal that left a deep wound in my soul and changed me forever. After that, I removed all the mirrors in the house so as not to see my exhausted and humiliated shadow. I could not tell anyone about this. Who would believe me? Tom was the favorite of the family. In the eyes of everyone else, he was flawless. Telling about what happened seemed useless. It would only mean exposing myself to even more humiliation and misunderstanding. Instead, I locked the pain inside, trying to live with it. With each passing day, I clutched the secret tighter, trying to appear normal. But inside, not a day went by that I didn't think of that terrible moment. The painful memories were like ink stains that couldn't be erased. Silence became my prison, and fear my jailer. Life could never be the same again. After that incident, I withdrew even more. None of Jake's friends wanted to talk to me. Neighbors and acquaintances rejected me. Every morning was a struggle just to get out of bed. I lost my job, abandoned my hobbies, and stopped seeing a future. Life became gray and hopeless. Dark clouds of loneliness and despair hung over me, and every day seemed like an endless trial. My apartment, once filled with comfort and light, began to resemble a prison cell. Light barely penetrated through the curtained windows, and every corner was saturated with an oppressive atmosphere. I no longer saw the meaning in everyday affairs and actions. Cooking became torture, food lost its taste, and the days merged into a shapeless mass of boundless despondency. At night, I tossed and turned in bed, listening to the ticking of the alarm clock, penetrating every cell of my being. In the darkness, I often replayed everything that had happened in my head and tried to understand how I could change the past. Pain and guilt filled my heart, making me grow cold to the world around me. I went outside less and less often, afraid to meet familiar faces and feel their condemning glances. The days passed in a fog. I hardly communicated with people, and even a trip to the store became a test. It seemed to me that every person saw my pain and contempt, although in fact they were absorbed in their own thoughts and affairs. I often found myself sitting on the bathroom floor, hugging my knees, and not knowing where to go next. My thoughts were filled with those moments when I lost touch with myself and the world around me. A great emptiness engulfed my heart, and the quiet hope that still remained gradually faded. I wanted to find the strength again and change my life, but I did not know where to start. The creation that once brought joy began to seem meaningless. All those beautiful moments now seemed distant and unattainable. On the verge of despair, I began to notice the little things. How the sun rays penetrated through small cracks in the curtains, how the birds sang outside the window, how drops of water flowed down the glass. These little moments, on some deep level, reminded me that life still goes on, even if everything now seemed dark and hopeless. The turning point came a few months later, when I hit rock bottom. One moonless evening, sitting in the kitchen, staring at my reflection in an empty teapot, I decided I'd had enough. My pain and frustration had turned to rage that became my fuel. I began to plan my comeback. It wasn't a snap decision. I was careful and methodical, thinking through every step. I studied their routines, watched them, looked for weaknesses. Tom was the first. I knew which bar he frequented on Fridays. That night, I sent my friend there. When he walked in, my friend was sitting at the bar with her cocktail. He was drunk as usual. The friend, who gave a different name, seemed friendly and involved. When Tom became insanely drunk, the friend served him a special drink. A little sleeping pill did the trick. My friend and I took him to an abandoned place that we had found earlier. There he woke up tied up, and I told him everything that was on his mind. I didn't hurt him, but I left him there for a few hours to make him feel helpless. The relationship with Jake's parents was more complicated. They continued to slander me. I started small. I destroyed their reputation. I told neighbors and acquaintances the same terrible things they said and did to me. I showed the world their true colors. It was slow, but every day I saw how their social circle narrowed, how the smiles on their faces faded. People began to avoid them, as they had avoided me before. One day, I accidentally met their next-door neighbor, and our conversation about the pain they caused me turned out to be the starting point for the further decline of their reputation. In parallel with this, I began to rebuild myself. I enrolled in therapy, returned to my hobbies, found support among people who believed in me and did not judge me. Life began to improve. I found a new job, began to smile again. A little less than a year passed when Tom and Jake's parents realized that they had destroyed themselves. They experienced the same thing I once did: isolation, despair, and pain. And although revenge was mentally difficult, it allowed me to let go of the past and start life with a clean slate. In the end, I found peace and inner strength and dedicated my life to helping those who are lost and hurt, to fight for justice.